أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Verily, our praise is due to Allah. Praise Him. We seek His aid and we ask for His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evils of our own selves and from the evils of our own actions. And whomsoever Allah guides, none can misguide. And whomsoever Allah leaves astray, none can guide back to the correct path. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We testify there is no deity worthy of our worship except for Allah, who is alone, no partnership, and never has and never will be another. And we bear witness that Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon him, is the last and the final prophet of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, brothers and sisters, friends and family, everybody tuning into the live stream, and everybody joining us for the Zoom room. Thank you for joining us again for another review or reading of the book When the Moon Split by Safiur, Rahman, Mubarakpuri. Today we're going to be continuing with our reading, continuing on page number 25 where we left off from last week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Bismillah. So his grandfather's affection, so Abdul Muttalib himself, growing old, carried Muhammad sallam back to Mecca. His heart was heavy, and he could not bear to see his young grandson suffer. He suddenly felt tenderness in his heart that he had never felt for his own sons. And when Abdul Muttalib sat with his friends, Muhammad sallam sat on a carpet next to him, a position no one else was allowed to occupy, and he used to stroke his back and observe his every movement. And Abdul Muttalib was sure the future would bring Muhammad sallam rare greatness. And tragically, Abdul Muttalib's time with his grandson was short, for he died when Muhammad sallam was only 8 years old, 2 months, 8 years, 2 months, and 10 days old. So then, under his uncle's care, after the death of Abu Muttalib, his son Abu Talib took Muhammad sallam under his care, and Abu Muttalib and Abdullah, the Prophet's father, were brothers, both born of the same mother. Abu Talib was not a wealthy man, but Muhammad brought Allah's blessing with him, and suddenly Abu Muttalib found that he could support his family easily with a small sum of money. And Bahira's warning. So when Muhammad sallam was 12 years old, and some sources specify that he was 12 years old, 2 months and 10 days old, Abu Talib planned to occupy a trade caravan to Syria, and both Muhammad sallam and Abu Talib dreaded the long separation, so Abu Talib decided to take Muhammad sallam with him. And once the caravan reached Basra on the border of Syria, the travelers broke journey for a short stay. A Christian monk by the name of Bahira lived in this city, and he came to welcome the caravan, and he walked past all the travelers, approached the young Muhammad sallam, holding Muhammad's hand, and he said, "This is the chief of the world and the messenger of the Lord. God has sent him as a mercy for all mankind." "Why do you say this?" the people inquired of him, and Bahira explained, "When he came this side of the pass, stones and trees bowed in prostration. They do not prostrate for anyone other than a prophet. Moreover, I recognized him from the seal of prophethood, which lies like an apple on the soft bone below his shoulders, and is mentioned in our scriptures." And Bahira then held a feast of honor of the caravan, and later he took Abu Talib aside and pleaded with him not to take Muhammad sallam any further, and he urged him to send the boy back. And he feared that the Jews and the Romans might recognize him as the promised messenger, in which case he felt Muhammad's life would be endangered. And Abu Talib heeded the monk's warning, and concerned for his nephew's safety, sent Muhammad sallam back to Mecca. So in the coming of age in Mecca, Muhammad sallam played an active role in his society and participated in some significant events in the community, two of which are recounted below, which is first the Battle of Bijar, When Muhammad was 20 years old, a battle broke out at the fair of Okaz in the month of Dhul Qa'dah. The warring tribes were the Quraysh and Kinana on one side, and the Qiyas Gilan on the other, and the fighting was fierce, and several people on both sides were killed. And at last they made peace on condition that whichever side had suffered the most casualties would get blood money, or a recompense for unlawful killing. This battle was the fourth and most deadly in a series of skirmishes that had erupted each of the previous 3 years. And it would, however, be the last, and it came to be known as the Battle of Bijar, or Arabic for immortality, as it took place in a sacred month when fighting was prohibited and violated the sanctity of a sacred month with bloodshed. And as a member of the Quraysh, Muhammad SAW was also present in the battle. His role was to collect the enemy's arrows and hand them over to his uncles. And Hilf al-Fudul, in the wake of the Battle of Fijar, later that month, a covenant was agreed upon amongst the 5 tribes of the Quraysh. It was known as Hilf al-Fudul, and its signatories were Banu Hashim, which again is the tribe of which Muhammad was from, Banu Abdul Muttalib, Banu Asad, Banu Zahra, and Banu Taim. And this covenant was born in response to a shameful denial of justice to a stranger. And a man came from Zabid to sell his merchandise in Mecca, and a local resident by the name of As bin Wa'il took all of the stranger's goods but refused to pay for them. And the helpless stranger approached the people of Banu Abdul Dar and Banu Makhzum, Banu Jama, Banu Saham, and Banu Adi, all of whom ignored his cry for redress. And in desperation, he climbed atop a mountain called Jebel Abu Qais and informed everyone of how all of his goods had been stolen. Then he implored his listeners to come forward to help him. His plea was answered by Zubair bin Abdul Muttalib, who volunteered to help the unfortunate stranger. And Zubair called on representatives of all the clans to assemble in the house of Abdullah bin Jadan of Banu Taim. And this assembly, the tribal leaders agreed that henceforth they would stand up for anyone who had suffered injustice, and regardless of his tribal affliction. They then forced As bin Wa'il to return the merchandise he had taken. And Muhammad SAW was present with his uncles during this institution of the covenant, which he regarded as an honorable pact. Long after Allah had made him a prophet, he was to declare that I was present when the covenant was agreed upon in the house of Abdullah bin Jadad, and I would not accept even a red camel in lieu of it. Had I been asked to uphold it, even in the days of Islam, I would have agreed. Next, in regards for choosing a profession, having lost his parents and his grandfather, Muhammad SAW, who was in care of his uncle, Abu Talib, came of age with practically no inheritance. And at first, he tried to make a living tending goats for Banu Asad, but then upon his return to Mecca, he tended goats for the Quraysh for a small sum, and the choice of occupation was significant. Later, after becoming a prophet, Muhammad SAW remarked that there had been no prophet who has not tended sheep, and noted for his trustworthiness, honesty, and piety, he came to be called Al-Amin, the trustworthy. Next, the journey to Syria on business of Khadijah. Muhammad's reputation led Khadijah bint Khuwaylid to entrust him with her merchandise to sell in Syria, and as a wealthy businesswoman, from a noble family of the Quraysh, she would hire men to conduct business on her behalf. So it happened that the young Muhammad SAW journeyed to Syria with her slave Maysara, and the trip was extremely successful and profitable, and upon his return to Mecca, Muhammad gave Khadijah her prophet. And Khadijah was twice widowed, having been married to Atiq bin Aid and then to Abu Hala. And when married to Abu Hala, she bore a son, And following her second husband's death, she received several proposals from various chiefs of the Quraysh, all of which she had refused. Now, however, impressed by Mosara's description of Muhammad Sallallahu character, she broached the topic of marriage to Muhammad Sallallahu through her friend Nafisa, and being open to the idea, he consulted his uncles, who sent his proposals to Amr bin Asad, Khadijah's uncle, and Amr accepted on his niece's behalf, and Muhammad gave 20 camels as dowry. And some sources do mention that he gave her 6 camels, and they were married in the presence of Banu Hashim and the chiefs of the Quraysh. And praising and glorifying Allah, Abu Talib recited the wedding sermon and formalized the union. And thus, within 2 months and some days, within Muhammad's return from Syria, he and Khadijah were then married. And he was 25 years old, while she was either 28 or 40. And Khadijah was Muhammad's first wife. He married none other during her lifetime, and she bore all his children except for Ibrahim, who was born to Maria Qibtiyya, or Mary the Copt, and they were named in order from birth: Qasim, Zainab, Ruqiyya, Kulthum, Fatima, Abdullah, and Ibrahim. And scholars, however, disagree about the exact number and order of births. And all of the sons passed away during childhood, but all of the daughters lived to see their father become a prophet. And each daughter embraced Islam and migrated to Medina, and all but Fatima died during the lifetime of the prophet. So Islam, and Fatima died 6 months after her father's death. In dispute over the Black Stone. So when Muhammad was 35 years old, a devastating flood damaged the Kaaba. The walls of the Kaaba had been weakened by a fire earlier, and the flood caused additional cracks to form, and the structure revered by the Quraysh was in danger of collapse. And seeing their house of worship was under the threat of ruin, the Quraysh decided to rebuild the Kaaba, and they resolved not to taint the project with resources gained through usury, prostitution, or larceny. And as the walls of the Kaaba were being torn down before they could be rebuilt, the Quraysh feared Allah would punish anyone who raised his hand against the sacred house. And Walid bin Mughira was the first to approach the Kaaba, declaring that Allah will not destroy the reformers, and he began to dismantle the walls of the Kaaba. And when the others saw that he had done so untouched by divine wrath, they joined in the work, and they demolished the Kaaba down to the original foundation laid by Ibrahim alayhi salam. So when the construction started, with each tribe being allotted specific duties, the nobles among them carried pieces of stone and piled them up in one place, and Muhammad SAW and his uncle Abbas were among those carrying stones. And a Roman mason named Bakum reconstructed the walls. However, the tribes were unable to collect enough money to rebuild the Kaaba completely, so a small wall was built showing the boundaries of the original foundation laid by Ibrahim. And quick side note, that is why we have that little rounded section today in the Kaaba. The actual dimensions of the Kaaba are actually much longer. It's not supposed to be the block shape, but there's a whole history about that. And shameless kind of mentioned here, there's a 3-part series that I made regarding the history of the Kaaba. Inshallah, made a part of the Friday reminders if you're so interested in learning a little bit more about that. But continuing, when the wall was completed, the small wall enclosed was about 6 cubits on the northern side of the Kaaba, and it's called Hijr Ismail. And when the wall was completed up to the spot where the black stone, Al-Hajar al-Aswad, was located, a dispute had arose, and each chieftain claimed the honor of putting the black stone in place, and the crisis continued for 4 or 5 days, and bloodshed was imminent. And at that time, Abu Umayyah, the oldest among them, found a solution to the problem. He suggested that the next man who entered the gate of the Kaaba should be given the authority to settle the dispute. And everyone agreed to this suggestion, and it was the will of Allah that the next man to enter the gate was Muhammad SAW. It's Muhammad, they said as soon as they saw him coming. Since he is trustworthy, we all agree to abide by his decision. And when Muhammad SAW learned of the details of the disputes, he asked them to bring a sheet. He then took the black stone and placing it on the sheet and asked each clan to take hold of an edge of the sheet and lift it in unison. And when the black stone was lifted up by the tribal chieftains, Muhammad SAW pushed it back into place with his own hands. And everyone was satisfied with Muhammad's decision, and a great conflict was averted. And the black stone rests 1.5 meters above the ground, with the Kaaba door about half a meter above the black stone. And the Quraysh did not lower the position of the door because they did not want anyone to enter the Kaaba without their permission. And they also doubled the height of the walls from 9 to 18 cubits. They added a roof about 15 cubits in height and 6 pillars in 2 rows inside the Kaaba to support it. So Muhammad's character before the prophethood. So from childhood, Muhammad was exceptionally intelligent and chaste and was highly regarded for his honesty, his valor, his justice, his piety, his patience, modesty, loyalty, and hospitality. And Abu Talib described his beloved nephew in the following words. He is fair and handsome. From his visage, mercy falls like rain. He is a shelter for the orphan and a protector of widows. And Muhammad SAW maintained good relations with his family, bore others' burdens, and guided the destitute towards self-sufficiency. And in keeping with the future role as Allah's messenger, one who was to outlaw all aspects of idolatry and polytheism, Muhammad SAW had an inherent hatred for the prevailing paganism of his time. Thus, although he was an integral part of his society, Muhammad SAW never attended any of the important local festivals and fairs that revolved around idol worship and drinking. And he was so careful not to eat the flesh of any animal slaughtered in the name of someone other than Allah, and avoided touching or even coming close to idols. And he especially detested hearing oaths sworn upon the pagan two most famous idols, Lat and Uzza. And so the importance of prophethood, with his aversion to some of the most cohesive social ties in Meccan society, it was inevitable that Muhammad SAW would grow apart from his fellow Meccans and their depraved way of life that included public drunkenness and female infanticide. He began to long for solitude and preferred to spend his time alone, away from noisy festivals and crowded markets. And at the same time, he felt the need to save his people from the destruction he felt was imminent. And his discontent grew, and he began to seek refuge in the cave of Hira. Mount Hira, which is known as Jebel al-Nur, the mountain of light, is a little less than 4 meters in length and a little more than 1.5, about 2 miles from Mecca, and its peak is visible from a distance, and the cave meters in width. If you ever visit, inshallah, to make a Hajj or Umrah, inshallah, it is one of the recommended places to go visit. Just be careful though; it's it can be very crowded, inshallah. Because other people want to have the same idea too. Alhamdulillah. Um, that his discontent grew and he began to seek refuge in the cave of Hira. Here he would spend long periods alone, and it was here that he worshipped not idols or imagined gods, but the one true God, Allah. And following the monotheistic practice of his forefather, Ibrahim, every year, 3 consecutive years, he spent a month of Ramadan in the cave. And he would then return to Mecca, circumambulate the Kaaba, and then go back home. And when Muhammad reached 40 years of age, he began to experience what could be called portents of prophethood. He would have visions, and whatever appeared to him in these visions and dreams would come true. So regarding the first revelation, one night, Monday night, just before the sunrise on the 21st of Ramadan, as mentioned to be August the 10th, 610 of the Common Era, CE, an event transformed the life of the man chosen to deliver Allah's message, just as it would change the lives of countless beings, most of whom were yet to be born. According to the lunar calendar, Muhammad was 40 years, 6 months, and 12 days old. And according to the solar calendar, he was 39 years, 3 months, and 22 days old. And he was alone in the cave of Hira, engaged in worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like he had done the previous 2 Ramadans. Aisha, uh, who has narrated so many of the Prophet's words and deeds, relates Muhammad's transition from an ordinary man to someone who would be forever be known simply as the Prophet. The Prophet ﷺ first began to have revelations in the form of good dreams which came true. Then he began to like solitude. He would go to the cave of Hira and meditate there in solitude for a number of days and nights. And he would take provisions with him to stay for an extended period. And when he returned to Khadijah, he would stock up again and go back to the cave. And this was his practice until truth was revealed to him by an angel while he was in the cave of Hira. The angel came to him saying, "Read." And Muhammad ﷺ replied, "I cannot read." And the angel then took hold of him and pressed him until he could no longer endure it any longer. And the angel let him go and said once again to read. "I cannot read," Muhammad ﷺ replied. The angel took hold of him a second time and pressed him until he could not endure it any longer. And after letting go, the angel said, "Read." "I cannot read," Muhammad ﷺ repeated. For a third time, the angel took hold of him and pressed him until he could no longer endure it any longer. And the angel released him and said, "Read in the name of your Lord, the Creator, He who created man from a clot. Read, and your Lord is the most bounteous." And the Prophet ﷺ was terrified and his heart was pounding hard. He returned home to Khadijah and said, "Cover me, cover me." And Khadijah covered him and helped him calm down. And he relayed what had happened in the cave and said, "I fear that something has happened to me." And his wife replied, saying, "Never, I swear by Allah, Allah would never disgrace you. You keep good relations with your family, help the feeble and destitute, serve your guests generously, and assist those who deserve help." So Khadijah then took the Prophet ﷺ to her cousin, the old and venerable Waraka bin Naufal. He knew Hebrew and was familiar with the Gospels, having left paganism for Christianity. "Oh, my cousin," Khadijah began, "listen to your nephew." "What have you seen, my nephew?" asked the blind old man. The Prophet ﷺ told Waraka what had happened in that cave, and the angel that was sent to you was the same angel that Allah sent to Musa. "I wish I were young and could live to see the day your own people drive you out of this city." And the Prophet ﷺ asked, "Will they drive me out?" And he replied, "Yes," said Naufal. "Never has a man brought something such as what you have without meeting hostility. If I live to see the day that you are expelled, I will support you with all of my might." And a few days later, however, Waraka died, and a long time passed before the Prophet ﷺ received a second revelation. And the Quran tells us that the first revelation descended in Ramadan on the night of power. The month of Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was revealed. Surah Baqarah, Surah 2, Ayat 185, and we have indeed revealed this message during the night of power, Surah 97, Ayat 1. So next, regarding a hiatus, after Jibril alayhi salam first appeared before Muhammad, so we saw him at the cave of Hira. A long time passed without any further revelation. A distressed Muhammad, so he feared Allah had abandoned him. Of course, why would his Lord have deserted him? In the moments of despair, he would want to throw himself off of a mountain, but then he would sense Jibril's presence and become calm again. And in this interim period was a time of contemplation, a time for Muhammad SAW to prepare himself for what lay ahead. And one day, Muhammad SAW returned to the cave of Hira to worship in solitude. And as he left the cave and began to descend the mountain, another strange event had taken place. The Prophet ﷺ described the event as follows: that when I descended the mountain and came to the valley, I heard a voice saying, "Muhammad, you are the prophet of Allah, and I am Jibril." Then I raised my head, and on the horizon I saw the angel who had come to me in the cave of Hira. I was filled with awe and bowed towards the earth. I hurried home to Khadijah and asked her to wrap me up. She put a blanket around me and sprinkled water on me. And it was at this time that the Prophet ﷺ received the second revelation. It comprised the first 5 verses of Surah Al-Mudaththir, which is Surah 74, ayats 1 through 7. O you wrapped in garments, arise and warn, magnify your Lord, and your clothing purify. Shun idols and false worship, and give not a thing in order to have more, or consider not your deeds of obedience to Allah as a favor to Him, and be patient for the sake of your Lord, i.e., perform your duty to Allah. So this revelation, with its instruction regarding worship, came before Muhammad SAW was instructed to perform the regular prayers, the Salah, and it marked the resumption of visitations by Jibreel, and subsequent revelations came in quick succession afterwards. And Muhammad SAW had been appointed as a prophet with the first revelation, and with the second revelation, he was made Allah's messenger and trusted with 2 tasks. The first task was to arise and warn, and he was ordered to teach the people about Allah and to warn them about the consequences of their sins. And the Prophet ﷺ's second task was to obey the commands of Allah and act as a model for others. And the surah contained a series of instructions to the Prophet, and a line-by-line examination reveals the basic religious practices ordered in Islam. In the original Arabic, the phrase fakabbir in the first verse means to worship Allah alone without associating any partners with Him. In the second verse, the expression the baka fatahir literally means purifying your clothes, but according to Muslim scholars, it also means purify your conduct. And in the next verse, warajaza fujur enjoins the Prophet to abstain from the pagan customs of the Arabs, and la tamnun tazakathir. This one I'm butchering here. Means do not expect to be rewarded in this world for your efforts. And finally, the last is be patient for your Lord's sake. So the mission begins. Prophet Muhammad SAW accepted his duties as prophet and messenger with resolute obedience, and he answered his Lord's call by inviting members of his household to worship Allah in keeping with His commandments. And they were to be Muslims, those who had surrendered to Allah, and their religion was Islam, the religion of peace. However, the Prophet's compatriots were a rough people accustomed to settling their disputes with swords, and they clung to idol worship because it had been the practice of their ancestors who had stayed far from the pure monotheism of Ibrahim and Ismail. And sensing their antagonism, the Prophet ﷺ began to quietly teach their closest to him, those whose hearts he felt would be open to the truth. And with that, since we just hit 7:30 here, what we got here? Yeah, let's stop here, inshallah, and we'll continue at the end of page 36, the first believers in the upcoming week. With that, jazakallah khairan everyone for joining in, for listening in. Please join us for the Zoom meeting, inshallah, for reflections and open discussions regarding the piece. We hope to see you next week. Allahumma subhanaka wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.